My husband is a member of the Workmen's Circle. Just now, reading over the Workmen's Circle periodical, Der Freund, after a day of housework, I noticed the announcement about the contest, why I left the old country, and what I found in America. To answer in a few words, I went through so much that all the movies I have seen pale in comparison.
Når man går her langs Islands Brygge og ser på det lette og sorgløse liv, folk har, er det svært at forestille sig det liv, min far og mor Bertha havde i det russiske imperium i begyndelsen af 1900-tallet. Her var fattigdom, voldtægt og terror en del af hverdagen. I denne bog findes min farmors selvbiografi baseret på en konkurrence, som YIVO Institute of Jewish Research udskrev i 1943. Jeg kendte min farmor Bertha til jeg var 10 år gammel. Hun har altid betydet utrolig meget for mig.
Daniel Sawyer er professor ved Fordham University i New York. Han er forsker i amerikansk historie.
So Bertha Fox's autobiography was part of a collection at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. YIVO is an acronym for Jiddische Wissenschaftlicher Institut, right? And this was a institute for research on the history and culture of Eastern European Jews, both in Eastern Europe and in their diaspora, where they went.
Min far, Noel Fox, var Berthas ældste søn. Jeg er født og opvokset i Danmark med Noel som min far og Gytter Uldal som min danske mor. I 2022, inden krigen startede, besluttede jeg mig for at følge min farmors fodspor til det russiske imperium. Jeg ønskede at finde ud af, hvor det var, hun kom fra, og hvad det var, hun i sin tid flygtede fra. Kiev, Ukraines hovedstad, ligger kun 3 timers flyvning fra Danmark. Ukraine har været selvstændigt siden 1991 og har ellers hørt til Rusland. Først som en del af det russiske imperium, og senere efter revolutionen i 1918 som en del af Sovjetunionen. Jeg valgte først at tage bussen til min farmors fødeby. En lille by kaldet Skriva, nord for Kiev.
I was born in Skriva, in the province of Kiev. All I know is that out of 6 children, 3 remained. Myself, an older sister, and a brother. I remember that during my childhood years we lived in our own house. According to my mother, we received the money for the house from my uncle in Kamenka Bugskaya, who was a very wealthy lumber merchant. He preferred to give my father a little money rather than a job, which would have been much more helpful. The house consisted of 2 large rooms with long tables and benches on one side and very little furniture on the other side. My father was a Russian Jewish teacher in the old style, a pauper of the first rank. Children came for lessons during the day and adults at night. We might have been able to make a living, but the tuition was very low, and the students did not always pay anyway. Sometimes the inspector would come and ask to see our permit for running a school, and the children would have to run off and disappear.
In this society, in this culture, the Jewish culture society in Eastern Europe, where the upper levels of learning were very prestigious, like a rabbi or a very learned person, the lower level teachers, this was a very low status and low paid job. So if you were teaching children the basics of reading, the aleph base, the Hebrew alphabet, this was a very poor occupation. And her father was a Malamed, so they were notoriously poor.
I recall that there was great poverty and that Mother wanted to help out. She tried to bake bread, but it didn't go well. So she learned how to mold galoshes. This provided a livelihood, but only in season.
Efter 2 timers bus ankommer jeg til Skriva, Berthas fødeby. En landsby i Kiev Oblast i det centrale Ukraine med 15.600 indbyggere, hvilket er omtrent det samme tal som i 1900, da Bertha blev født her. Dengang var Skriva en del af det russiske imperium. Nogle jøder havde valgt at bo på dette område, men for de fleste jøder blev det valgt for dem. Russerne kaldte det Pale Area of Settlement, et område, hvor jøder skulle bo fra 1791 til 1719, og uden for dette område var det normalt forbudt for jøderne at bo.
They created this region where Jews were permitted to live. This was not a tiny ghetto. This was actually several whole countries, that are now several whole countries. Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, much of Latvia, and Poland was technically a different jurisdiction, but it was adjacent to the Pale, and Jews were living there, Congress Poland. So this was the western end of the Russian Empire, the area where Jews were permitted to live. They were, it depends which part, but they were, you know, a minority, but a fairly substantial minority. And in towns, they were a much bigger percentage of the population, sometimes even a majority. Even within the Pale, there were times where Jews were technically not permitted to live in the villages, in the rural areas. They lived mostly in the towns. There were a lot of exceptions to this. Many people were poor craftspeople, tailors especially, shoemakers, things like that. Inside the Pale, there were X number of tailors. There were lots of Jewish tailors per, 1,000 of the population or something like that. Right outside the Pale, there were many fewer, but you couldn't move outside the Pale, right? So people started moving around. Interestingly enough, they move, one movement was from the northeast sections of the Pale where the economy was worse to the south, which was Ukraine, which was where Bertha was from, right, where the economy was better and there were more opportunities, even though there was more violence there also. So people are moving towards the pogroms because there's more economic opportunity.
The interior side of the wall facing the street was damp and often dirty, so the children would indeed get sick. My brother and I would go from one illness to the next, scarlet fever, diphtheria, not to mention all the other childhood illnesses. I recall that my mother would leave my brother sick in bed with my father to watch over him and run by herself to the Rebbe. When she came back, she would say that the Rebbe had given her an amulet and promised to pray to God himself. Nevertheless, he told her to call the doctor.
I Berthas selvbiografi omtaler hun pogromer. Pogromer er voldelige angreb fra ikke-jødiske befolkningsgrupper på jøder. Omfattende pogromer brød ud efter mordet på zar Alexander den 3. i 1881, og for Berthas vedkommende i 1905 og efter 1. verdenskrig i 1917 til 1919. Polske og ukrainske nationalister og soldater fra den Røde Hær deltog alle i pogromer, der dræbte 10.000 af jøder i det nuværende Ukraine og andre steder. Taxaen fra busterminalen køres til vandværket i Skriva. Her skal vi møde formanden for det jødiske samfund, Jefim Schwarzburg. Han er i 70'erne og en travl mand med ansvaret for vandværket i Skriva. Han har indvilget sig i at tage os med til den sidste synagoge i Skriva, som blev genopbygget med amerikansk støtte i 2001.
There were times when all the children would cry in unison, "We want to eat!" Then father would leave the house, and I would hear mother saying to herself, "Good for you. You go off to the house of study, to the Rebbe. Spare yourself their cries." On the Sabbath, mother told us not to cry in front of people, and indeed, she would make every possible effort to see to it that we had something to chew on. Father would make wine from a few raisins for Kiddush and Havdalah. After he came home from synagogue, he made Kiddush, and then all of us sipped from the same little glass. After Havdalah, he poured out the remnants, wet the tips of his fingers, and stuck them in his pockets to bring a prosperous week.
Когда мы приступили к реставрации в 2001 году, нас попросили, чтобы мы оставили что-то старое. Здесь потолок висел прямо над головой. Поэтому мы натянули домкратами потолок, мы его не трогали, только облицевали. Так евреи моют руки. 3 раза. 1, 2, 3. Перед молитвой. На открытие синагоги в 2005 году приехало 1000 паломников со всего мира. С Америки, с Канады, с Европы. Были даже с таких стран экзотических, как Новая Зеландия, Мексика, Южная Африка. Они все сюда приезжали. This is kosher kitchen. Вот это называется миква, ритуальные бассейны. Когда приезжают сюда, это специальный бассейн для раввина. Он здесь первый купается, если можно, он туда еще заходят люди в этот бассейн, евреи, паломники. Они здесь принимают, не купаются, а принимают ритуальный, такой ритуал, микве. Евреи знают, о чем это я говорю. Они здесь моются уже начисто с мылом, потом поднимаются, идут в молельный зал, молятся, а потом обедают.
Vi anmodede om at møde den lille gruppe jøder, som stadig bor i byen Shriva. Men det var ikke muligt på grund af corona, og fordi de er meget gamle. Derefter foreslog vi at besøge en jødisk butik. Men så fik vi at vide, at jødiske butikker ikke længere eksisterer. Her er et billede af den sidste jødiske butik i Shriva, som nu er lukket. Den gamle jødiske skole har ikke længere jødiske elever, men bliver i dag brugt til ukrainske børn. Tidligere var der en privat drengeskole og 2 pigeskoler for jøder. Der var 7 synagoger på Berthas tid. De fleste af dem blev brændt eller ødelagt under 2. verdenskrig. Resten blev genopbygget og bruges i dag af fabrikantvirksomheder. Der boede 8.900 jøder på Berthas tid i Shriva, men i dag bor der kun 50-70. Shriva har 3 kirkegårde, men der er kun én, der ligner en kirkegård i almindelig forstand. Vi ankommer her til den nye jødiske kirkegård, som er omgivet af en betonmur med en jernport ved indgangen. De 2 andre kirkegårde er blevet ødelagt under krigen. Gravstenene er siden blevet fjernet. I dag ligger der på de 2 nævnte tidligere kirkegårds jord boligbygninger og et sejlværk. I år 2000 blev der bygget et monument her på den nye jødiske kirkegård for at markere den største massegrav. Monumentet og graven indeholder rester fra 3 forskellige skyderier af jøder, der fandt sted under 2. verdenskrig, da tyskerne kom hertil.
After consulting with the Rebbe Moishezon, my parents decided to sell the house and move to Kremenchug because there were many people from Skvira there, and father even had a nephew, a big businessman. We might be more successful there. No sooner said than done. We sold the house, paid our debts, and left. It was summer. I caught a cold. As I was always too thin, the doctor said that in order to protect my lungs, I should take a vacation or go to a spa. Since there was no extra money for such luxuries, my parents had a plan. Mother was from Lysanka, and a sister of hers was still there. I would go there. There was no doctor in Lysanka, so she had no one to ask for advice. If the cure for my illness, similar to her own, was pine extract, then she knew what to do. I settled into a Gentile home in a house a little further on. We had heard that in the village there was a nobleman, the landlord of the village, with many servants and other luxuries, but we didn't pay much attention to this. One day we were both sitting with a girlfriend under a tree. It was a hot day. and a well-dressed man came over to us and asked us in a stern tone of voice, "What are you doing here?" "We're resting from the heat." He threw us an angry look and left. That very night, I was in a deep sleep on a bench near the window when I heard a commotion. The still of the night was shattered by a banging on the door. "Open up!" The Gentile owner of the house got out of bed. Someone pounded on the door again with a heavy object. "I said open up!" The head of the house said angrily, "What, there's a fire somewhere again?" But at this point there was a harder knock and a yell. "In the name of the law, open up, otherwise I'll open it myself." They opened the door. It turned out there was no fire anywhere. But the problem was right there in the house. I was a Jew. The constable had a stick in hand and kept stewing and tapping with his stick, yelling at the Gentile, "Don't you know the law of the Tsar? A Jew in your house? In a village?"
Номер 2 з полученням Івано-Франківськ, Костянтинівка. Поїзд знаходиться на 9-й.
It didn't bother me that I would sometimes work late and sleep over at my cousin's house. I had a better supper at their table than in my home. And so it was on that day I slept over there as usual on the divan in the dining room. We extinguished the lamps and it quieted down. I do not remember how long I slept. I was awakened by the front doorbell, the bell of my cousin's room, and the servant's bell. Frightened out of my sleep, I jumped to the floor and heard the hysterical cries of Madame Schlitz. "Faster! We are in danger!" The Gentile maid ran down the steps from the upper floor. Out of breath, she ordered, "Quick, bring all the heavy objects, the press from the office to the barricade the front door." My cousin Schlitz came out of his room and asked what had happened. What happened? A massacre, not freedom. The Cossacks came on horses and we went upstairs, closed the innermost shutters, and put out the lights in the front room. Before long we heard voices shouting in Russian, "God save the Tsar! Beat the Jews!" Glass began to break all around. Suddenly we heard a shot. Soon bullets flew and the front window shattered. Schlitz told everyone to lie down on the floor. The landlord was a Gentile by the name of Pederygin. Together with his son, he took all the icons and crosses from his house and, crawling on all fours through the downstairs door to the store, placed them in the window. We no longer had to fear shooting, for the crosses were protecting us. I felt torn by the desperate need to go home, but they didn't let me. I worried about what was happening to my family in the little house with the flimsy little chain on the front door, with no icons or crosses to protect them. The maid kept going in and out through the back door looking for news. She told us terrible stories, that hospitals were packed with the wounded and that there were many dead. The Tsarist system was such that you couldn't keep your head above water. The pogroms of 1905 took place. Our home did not escape attack. Like Jews everywhere, we lived through pogroms without end. The pogromists always burst into the houses, took whatever there was, and left. Before we could recover, it started all over. My experiences cannot be described. The Jews, powerless, could no longer bear to wait it out alone in their own houses, so they gathered together with neighbors. People from many homes, up to 100 people or more, gathered in one house so that their terror would not be so great.
Efter 7 timer med tog ankom jeg til Kremenchuk. Min farmor flyttede hertil i 1905 med sin familie, da byen var en del af det russiske imperium. Byen har over 200.000 indbyggere og er meget større end Triva. Dengang boede der næsten 30.000 jøder her, som altså udgjorde 47% af befolkningen. I dag bor der mindre end 4.000 jøder i Kremenchuk og udgør kun 2% af befolkningen. Dengang spillede jøderne en vigtig rolle i byens udvikling, især inden for tømmerhandel og tobaksfremstilling. Det jødiske liv var rigt på den tid. Der var 60 bedesteder, flere synagoger, et jødisk hospital, jødiske privatskoler for drenge og piger. Og i dag er der kun en enkelt synagoge tilbage, som er blevet genopbygget. Denne smukke bygning, som tidligere tilhørte en jødisk tobaksfabrikant, er blevet omdannet til et museum. Den tager sig nu af de lokale historiske udstillinger. Jeg fik mulighed for at møde lederen.
Итак, мы с вами находимся в одном из старых зданий Кременчуга, которые уцелели в годы войны Второй мировой. Это здание принадлежало семье володарских фабрикантов, которые занимались произведением табака. Семья была большая, и дом, соответственно, тоже был большой. Берта Фокс обязательно видела завод Андера, потому что это был крупнейший завод в Кременчуге. У него была своя интересная история. Они производили сельскохозяйственную продукцию, и поэтому она не могла не видеть. Мы показываем нашим экскурсантам предметы быта, предметы торговли, которыми пользовались кременчужане в то время, конец 19-го, начало 20 века. Например, мужчины обращают внимание на пивные бутылки.
Right, and she talks about something else which is very important. It was very important in her life, and it was very important in the development of Jewish society in the last years of the Russian Empire, right? And that's the revolutionary movement. Many of the young people were kind of leaving traditional life, and they were being attracted to these revolutionary movements, and revolutionary in two different ways. For Jews, there were two different kinds of pulls, right, on them. One was to Zionism, right, and Zionism was a nationalist movement which drew on many traditional kinds of hopes, right, for the restoration of the Jewish nation in the land of Israel. There were many different Zionist factions. But then there was also the Bund, right? And the Bund, the full name was the Yiddischer Arbeiterbund, right? The Jewish Labor or Jewish Workers Bund. Bund means alliance or union in Yiddish, as in German. And this was a socialist, Marxist party, kind of half a party, half a trade union among the Jews in the Pale Settlement. So the Bund was a Jewish socialist party. It actually functioned sometimes as half a trade union, half a political party. It was illegal under the Tsar, right? That was trying to organize the Jewish proletariat, the Yiddish-speaking Jewish working class, for revolution in Russia, to overthrow the Tsar and to establish socialism, right?
Вот это здание было на территории 20-й школы. Это называлось Хоральная синагога, самая большая синагога в Кременчуг, от 40 синагог, которые были, это была главная. И она разрушена была во время войны. Вот это здание находится на улице Победа. Это была ешива, религиозная школа. Она была в период 103 года назад до 101 год назад. Оно закрылось. Называется Арон Кодеш, святой шкаф, где находится Святая Тора. Вот это у нас 3 Тора. 1, 2, 3. Это самая Novi. Конечно, надо помнить, что было, и надо рассказывать наши дети, но надо еще смотреть вперед. Если мы будем плачать все время о 6 миллионов, которые были погибли, мы ничего, результат никакой будет. Нам надо жить дальше и построить еврейский народ дальше, и рассказывать не только о погроме, рассказывать о нашей традиции, что люди могли жить. Сейчас, слава Богу, на Украине и в много стран евреи живут свободно, и есть демократия, слава Богу, и слава Богу. Это детский сад, мы сейчас сделали ремонт, здесь еще мебель нету, ничего нету, ну пока что осталось так. Ну еще так, без мебели, ну.
Et par måneder før vi ankom, var der skyderi ved synagogen i Kremenchuk. Jødiske steder er blevet vandaliseret flere gange i Kremenchuk i de seneste år. I 2016 blev der sat ild til et lokal jødisk rabbiners gravsted. Det samme sted blev vandaliseret i 2013, i 2014, i 2015 og i 2021. Nogle gange med spraymaling med nazisymboler. Og i 2009 blev der sprøjtemalet på bygningen. Evgenia Mikhalona har startet et lille museum i Kremenchuk om Holocaust. Hun er ikke selv jøde, men synes det er vigtigt, at jøderne skal mindes og ikke glemmes. I en skole i byen har hun lavet sin egen udstilling.
Мы находимся на территории, на которой в 1942 году осенью производились расстрелы еврейского населения города Кременчуга. Эта территория занимала примерно площадь около 2 квадратных километров. Начиная от этого училища и вся вот та территория, где сейчас застроена 9-этажными домами, это все были ямы-могилы, которые рыли для себя сами евреи под принуждением немецких оккупантов. И потом в эти ямы-могилы их расстреливали, сбрасывали и закапывали. Здесь, на этой территории, находилось 36 ям-могил.
Her er monumentet over de dræbte jøder, som Evgenia har fået lavet.
В сентябре 1941 года немцы вошли в город. Они приказали всех евреев собрать здесь, на территории бараков. И они находились там длительное время, на протяжении нескольких месяцев. И в это время их постоянно гоняли вот на эту территорию рыть для себя вот эти ямы-могилы.
Efter pogromerne besluttede Berta at forlade det russiske imperium, uanset hvad. Mulighederne var begrænsede, men her spiller tilfældighederne en vigtig rolle. En familie på 3, far, mor og datter, havde visum til Palæstina. Alt var klart, men så viste det sig, at datteren havde forelsket sig i en kommissær og ikke ønskede at rejse, og så fik Berta hendes papirer. Ved ankomsten til Konstantinopel fik Berta at vide af det jødiske samfund, at Palæstina var i krise. De rådede hende til at stige af i Konstantinopel og forsøge at få arbejde og vente på muligheden for at rejse til Amerika.
Upon arrival in Constantinople, I discovered that Palestine was in crisis and it would be difficult for me to make a living there. Not wasting too much time thinking about it, I went to the Jewish Colonization Association. I told them the secret, that I was traveling with false papers, and asked for advice on what to do.
Efter mange vanskeligheder fik Berta et visum og kunne begynde sin rejse på MS Empress of Canada over Atlanten.
On the ship I had made a few girlfriends who were medical workers. They had immediately gotten positions in hospitals and encouraged me to try a career as a nurse. They explained the basics to me, taught me how to take people's temperature and so on. Here I am reminded of the Russian poem, "If you fall into a patch of wildflowers, you will become fragrant like them."
Ved ankomsten til Amerika, kun 23 år gammel, blev Bertha hentet i havnen af HIAS, en jødisk organisation, der hjælper flygtninge i Amerika.
I got a position at the Montefiore Home and Hospital and worked in the tuberculosis ward. I myself caught cold and underwent a tonsil operation. After I got better, I got a job at Israel Zion Hospital.
Coming into the United States before, say, 1917 wasn't as difficult. There were no numerical limits. There were, however, restrictions on certain medical conditions or psychological conditions. You had to show that you were not become a public charge, right? It still exists today, that you would not have to get aid from the, in those days, the local government or the state government, right? So they gave medical examination, and you had to show you had a certain amount of money.
Hovedparten af de indvandrere, der kom til New York i slutningen af 1900-tallet og starten af det 20. århundrede, kom til Lower East Side. I 1920 var det jødiske kvarter i Lower East Side et af de største. Her boede der 400.000 emigranter. En stor del af jøderne kom til at arbejde i de såkaldte sweatshops, tøjfabrikker indrettet i lejligheder uden hensyn til sikkerhed og arbejdsforhold. Jøderne her, som oftest var ufaglærte, arbejdede lange timer for få penge.
So this is your shop here?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell about who came here?
My parents came here from, well, it's now Belarus in the early 1900s. Yep, and I've been here 42 years in this store. All this stuff, yeah. It was the biggest department store in New York City, I believe. There's a pink building, it goes up halfway around the block, and it was all one big department store. It's a famous building called the Pink Building.
Den lyserøde bygning, hvor i Robert har sin forretning, var engang Ridleys store magasin. Det var det største af slagsen i New York. I slutningen af 1880 beskæftigede de omkring 2.500 emigranter. De fleste af disse var unge jødiske indvandrerkvinder.
I married Morris, a fine man, a jeweler, who came from Moscow by ship.
Morris Fox havde sin egen juvelérforretning i Maiden Lane på Manhattan. Maiden Lane var kendt for smykkeforretninger som denne.
So by the 1920s, you should know that the Lower East Side was already declining. And other parts of New York City were coming up, other neighborhoods in New York City. People were moving, Jews were moving out of the Lower East Side, and the population was actually declining. And they were moving outward along transportation lines, mass transportation lines, to, first of all, to East Harlem, for example, but then to the Bronx. And in the 1920s, the Bronx was booming, right? That's when the Bronx really took off. The Bronx was almost half Jewish. It was the most Jewish part of New York City.
I 1828 købte Bertha og hendes ægtefælle Morris et rækkehus på Noble Avenue i Bronx. Huset var købt på lån, og de lejede den nederste etage ud. Bertha fødte her 2 sønner, min far og hans bror, Reuven.
I have 2 boys, Noel and Reuven, so I am the only one in my family saved from death by coming to America. My only fear is that my children will have to live through as much as I did.
Det var sandsynligvis i dette hus i 1943, Bertha skrev sin selvbiografi om at leve i det russiske imperium. De 2 løver på dørtrappen var der også dengang. Men den kristne figur i vinduet er ny og fortæller historien om, hvordan området har ændret sig fra at være et jødisk kvarter, som det var dengang.
My grandmother lived here once. What is it like today, this neighborhood?
So right now it's mainly like Spanish people, more like blacks that live now in the neighborhood. No more Jewish, I can tell you that. I would say a little bit of violence, you know, in the nights obviously, but not as peaceful as I maybe years ago. When the sun is out, you know, everybody's doing their barbecues, their car washing like I'm doing here now. You know, everything's nice. Not as dangerous, but when the night, you surely don't want to be, you know, out here.
Cirka 30 år efter min farmor Bertha ankom til New York, skete der noget overraskende. Mange af indbyggerne i Bertas fødeby, den hardistiske landsby Striva i Rusland, flygtede til Amerika på grund af pogromer og massedrab under 2. verdenskrig. Og ligesom min farmor slog de rødder. Og så opstod der i 1954 en landsby kaldet New Screver i Rockland County, New York. New Screver endte med at blive kaldt New Square efter en anglificering.
Bertha was from Skver, and Skver was a center of one Hasidic dynasty. The Skver Rebbe was based in Skver, right? That doesn't mean all his followers lived in Skver, and it doesn't even mean all the people in Skver were his followers. But certainly they must have been very strong there.
New Square har i dag næsten 10.000 indbyggere, som overvejende er medlemmer af den hasidistiske bevægelse.
So we're going to New Square now.
Yeah, I'm going to New Square now.
This is New Square. Okay.
Da vi kom ind i New Square, blev vi pludselig standset af 4 politibiler, fordi vi filmede. Vi var blevet advaret om, at sådan noget kunne ske. New Square er blevet fuldt tæt i pressen på grund af deres strikte leveregler, for eksempel af radio, fjernsyn, internetforbindelser og aviser forbudt. Mødre har forbud mod at køre bil, og de skal barbere deres hoveder. I 2014 besøgte tidsskriftet Village Voice landsbyen New Square, og dengang var der større åbenhed.
My favorite part living in the village is living with all of my children here, playing very nice, peaceful with everyone, trying to be in peace with everyone.
Living here, it's safe, very safe, safest community in the USA.
And most of us going to work. Some are learning Torah the whole day as a practice, but some not learning Torah the whole day. And after work and after eating and being with the family, I'm not asking them to be like us. I'm not asking us to be like them. And in the United States, everyone can be like he wanna be. That's why it's a good country.
Let us hope that a wiser day will prevail over the dark night. Humanity will lift up its head in freedom. Then our Jewish duty will be to multiply ourselves and replace the gruesome number of victims with new lives.